Hello, friends. Back again for some more consideration of how to read the writings of the beloved guardian of Shoghi Effendi. We've been moving through uh, the guardian's elucidation of essential verities of the cause, fundamental truths of the faith, found in the Baha'i writings and interpreted by Shoghi Effendi in a document called The Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Now, friends, the guardian sent his messages generally to the American Baha'i community, those earlier messages, and they edited them in the sense of adding titles and things into them. For instance, at the end of this last section that we were reading about the Bab, it goes to Abdul Baha. And yet the first paragraph of the section on Abdul Baha is really to do generally with the discourse that the guardian is engaged in. And it is one of these occasional reviews that he makes of what he's been doing, which of course is very, very helpful to us because it reminds us then, in his own words, what he wants us to understand. So we're going to look at this paragraph, broken it down a bit, and review that initially here before we go on to the content of the bulk of the content about Abdul Baha. Is titled this Dispensation Review. The guardian at this point, he's finished his exposition about the Bab, and he says, I have in the foregoing pages ventured to attempt an exposition of such truths as I firmly believe are implicit in the claim of him who is the fountainhead of the revelation of the Baha'i revelation. Now, you'll recall that in the dispensation in the first section about Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi drew quotations, some 40 quotations, which buttressed the claim of Baha'u'llah, that is, they clarify the breadth and scope of the claim that Baha'u'llah's divine verses have made. And this is very important to review and realize that the guardian has, out of the whole revelation that he's familiar with, he's chosen these particular quotations to expand to in his exposition of truths implicit in the claim of the fountainhead of the Baha'i revelation, which of course is Baha'u'llah. That's the first point he's calling our attention to that he did. Then he goes on, he says, I have moreover endeavored to dissipate such misapprehensions as may naturally arise in the mind of anyone contemplating so superhuman a manifestation of the glory of God. And you recall that back in the section on Baha'u'llah, he says, after quoting these terrific quotations that frame the claim of Baha'u'llah as the supreme manifestation, he says, to whoever may read these pages, a word of warning seems, however, advisable before I proceed further with the development of my argument. Let no one meditating in the light of the afore quoted passages on the nature of the revelation of Baha'u'llah mistake its character or misconstrue the intent of its author. The divinity attributed, and this has to do with the next point on our bullet list there, the divinity attributed to so great a being and the complete incarnation of the names and attributes of God in so exalted a person should under no circumstances be misconceived or misinterpreted. The human temple that has been made the vehicle of so powerful a revelation must, if we be faithful to the tenets of our faiths, remain entirely distinguished from that innermost spirit of spirits and eternal essence of essences, that invisible yet rational God, who, however much we extol the divinity of his manifestations on earth, can in no wise incarnate his infinite, his unknowable, his incorruptible, and all-embracing reality in the concrete and limited frame of a mortal being. Indeed, the God who could so incarnate his own reality would, in the light of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, cease immediately to be God. So crude and fantastic a theory of divine incarnation is as removed from and incompatible with the essentials of Baha'i belief as are the no less inadmissible pantheistic and anthropomorphic conceptions of God, both of which the utterances of Baha'u'llah emphatically repudiate and the fallacy of which they expose. I have striven, he says, to explain the meaning of the divinity with which he who is the vehicle of so mysterious an energy must be invested. And you look back at the quotations there about that, the voice of the divinity, the call of God himself, those quotations that followed the explanation that we just read out. Then the next point he says is that the message, he says at the end, I've also, to the best of my ability, undertaken to demonstrate this, that the message which so great a being has in this age been commissioned by God to deliver to mankind recognizes the divine origin and upholds the first principles of every dispensation inaugurated by the prophets of the past, and stands inextricably interwoven with each of them. I've also, to the best of my ability, undertaken to demonstrate. To return to one of the previous printouts that you have there available to you, to review Baha'u'llah's how he identifies this revelation with past dispensations. Shoghi Effendi has outlined this for us in a very succinct way in several places in his writings. This one I've chosen to go back to so that just refreshes in our mind the scope and the importance of this element. It's particularly in view of Baha'u'llah, one of his principles is the oneness of religion. That is, there's only one religion, and has brought the keys, he's brought the vision of how we can look at issues and see them all as inherent in his revelation and reflective in his revelation. And indeed, he weaves the language of the past revelations into his writings in many places. In the revelation itself, they're reflective of the original words of the original languages of those divine teachings. And they, for the people that are steeped in the knowledge of those scriptures, it reassures them of the closeness of Baha'u'llah's revelation to their own previous revelations. One eternal faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. It abrogates unconditionally all the dispensations gone before it. This is very important because we want to be careful in the statements that we make in any kind of interfaith discussion that from the point of view of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, those dispensations have gone before, and their social teachings, this particularly relates to the social teachings and the vision of those teachings, which are always relative to the time that they appeared, they have been abrogated. But the second point, Baha'u'llah upholds uncompromisingly the eternal verities that those dispensations enshrine. He recognizes firmly and absolutely the divine origin of their authors. He preserves inviolate the sanctity of their authentic scriptures. He disclaims any intention of lowering the status of their founders or of abating the spiritual idea inculcate. He clarifies and correlates their functions, reaffirms their common, their unchangeable and fundamental purpose, recognizes their seemingly divergent claims and doctrines, readily and gratefully recognizes their respective contributions to the gradual unfoldment of one divine revelation, unhesitatingly acknowledges itself, his own revelation, to be but one link in the chain of continually progressive revelations. He supplements their teachings with such laws and ordinances as conform to the imperative needs and are dictated by the growing receptivity of a fast evolving and constantly changing society. And he proclaims its readiness and ability to fuse and incorporate these contending sects and factions into which they have fallen into a universal fellowship, functioning within the framework and in accordance with the precepts of a divinely conceived, a world unifying, a world redeeming order. As founding passes by, there are further quotations in that section here you can find. One of them comes from Promised Days Come, page 108. Now we go back to the review sheet that we were looking at. And Shoghi Effendi states that the author of such a faith, who repudiates the claim to finality which leaders of various dominations uphold, has, despite the vastness of his revelation, disclaimed it for himself. I have likewise felt it necessary to prove and emphasize. And he's given us various quotations in the latter part of that section on Baha'u'llah, showing that the nature of progressive revelation is that he's not the last manifestation of God. Now, it's interesting in this connection to take note that where it talks about there will be future manifestations, it says clearly that there will be no new message from God, no new revelation, ere the lapse of 1,000 years. No less than 1,000 years is the prophesied length of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Not the cycle, the Baha'i cycle goes on, as you know, endlessly, but the dispensation is no less than 1,000 years. Now, friends, we have tablets from Abdul-Baha interpreting this, where he states that the Baha'i dispensation is will be no less than 1,000 years, but he says it may be several thousand years, it may be 5,000 years. In one tablet, as far as tablets are concerned, one tablet he says it may be 10,000 years before a new manifestation appears. In a talk in Egypt, he states that it may be 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 years before a new manifestation appears. Now, friends, in a sense, we want to explore, we want this first Baha'i dispensation, which he said is the holiest and most outstanding dispensation of the Baha'i cycle. We wanted to bear exquisite fruits. We wanted to make its mark, obviously, in history. And our own services, in some small ways, assist in that. And we are participating in this day of God, this special, very special day of God. Then he comes to the final point, which we've just covered in the section of the Bab that we've been looking at, that the Bab, notwithstanding the duration of his dispensation, should be regarded primarily not as the chosen precursor of the Baha'i faith, but as one invested with the undivided authority assumed by each of the independent prophets of the past, seemed to me yet another basic principle, the elucidation of which would be extremely desirable at the present stage of the evolution of our cause. And this was really the first full, clear statement that the Guardian had made with regarding who is the Bab, what is his role in the Baha'i dispensation, as the revelation of Baha'u'llah, when Shoghi Effendi begins the dispensation, he talks about it being the 90th anniversary of the birth of our faith, whereas that was the beginning of the Bab's dispensation. Now the Bab's dispensation has been characterized in different ways, and I think we have to see it in a different light, each one of them. One is that it lasted until Baha'u'llah received his revelation in the Sayyid Shah. Another is that it lasted into the year 20, into the 1863, when Baha'u'llah declared that he was the author of an independent revelation from God. And then we have the writings, a letter of the Guardian quite clearly saying that because of the Bab reigning together with Baha'u'llah over the Baha'i dispensation, in a sense, his dispensation lasts as long, or will last as long, as the dispensation of Baha'u'llah itself. They are the twin manifestations of the day of God. So that's just quite important. The other thing, he wants us to not say that only he's the precursor of the Baha'i faith, but he is a full manifestation of God endowed with undivided authority, and as are the independent manifestations of the past, as we read there, endowed with constancy, a term which means that they reveal scriptures, and that lesser manifestations, prophets of God that appear after them, come under their shadow until a new revelation of a new book comes to mankind, as in the case now with the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Now we want to go back, and we're going to enter into the study of the Master. And I just want to mention at the beginning of this that there were pilgrims in the early 1930s, very bright pilgrims. I mean, one of them was Keith Ransom Kaler, who gave her life and was crowned with the title of the Hand of the Cause of God after her mission, during her mission to Iran, to help alleviate the sufferings and gain rights for the Baha'is while she was there. And in speaking with the Guardian, they spoke about the understanding of the American Baha'i community amongst the teachers, and everything was quite confirmed. They've been, of course, under the influence of the brightness and greatness of the figure of the Master. And they believed, as Baha'u'llah had come in the station of the Father, that Abdu'l-Baha, his son, was the return of the Son. In other words, he was the return of the Christ figure. That Baha'u'llah was God the Father, and then Abdu'l-Baha came as the Son, as the mirror of the Son, the return of Jesus. And Shoghi Effendi said that that's quite unsubstantiated in the writings, and something that the Master, throughout his ministry, fought against, that there should be this understanding which gives an equivalent station to Abdu'l-Baha, to a manifestation of God. He said this is not correct. And it provides the enemies with fuel for their opposition to the Master, because the claims of Muhammad Ali were, though Abdu'l-Baha didn't say so, yet he was acting like a manifestation of God and was revealing tablets, and his guidance was something which violated that no one would have a message from God until the next manifestation comes. So he said that overestimating the station of the master was as detrimental to the proper understanding of the faith as underestimating it. And then he said, so because of that, he felt obliged to set out very clearly the position of the master, because the master's own statements about his own position, he said, are not sufficient because he's assumed a posture of humility and simplicity. We have to look to the writings of Baha'u'llah himself to understand the station of the master. So before we go back to, we start this section, we read here regarding the master. And finally, there emerges on a plane of its own and in a category entirely apart from the one occupied by the twin figures that preceded him, the vibrant, the magnetic personality of Abdu'l-Baha, reflecting to a degree that no man, however exalted his station, can hope to rival, the glory and power with which they who are the manifestations of God are alone endowed. So he has a very special station. We'll see Shoghi Effendi's pressed in this section to clarify that. I mean, nobody had, I don't think, a greater appreciation of the master after his passing and during his ministry than Shoghi Effendi. The key here is they reflect to a degree unrivaled the glory and power of the manifestation of God. He's a clear mirror of that. Now we go on. I wanted to jump ahead a bit here to words of Shoghi Effendi recorded in God Passes By. He says that his cause, precious beyond the dreams and hopes of men, enshrining within its shell that pearl of great price to which the world since its foundation had been looking forward, kingdom of God on earth, or something related to that, confronted with colossal tasks of unimaginable complexity and urgency, was beyond a peradventure in safekeeping. He's been declaring that this appointment of Abdu'l-Baha as the center of the covenant safeguarded the future development of the cause. This institution of the covenant, quite unique in the history of mankind, such a powerful lesser covenant, established Abdu'l-Baha as the head of the cause and the interpreter of his scriptures. Then Shoghi Effendi adds on a breakdown of different aspects or titles which one could apply to Baha'u'llah based on authoritative scriptural sources from the revelation verses themselves. And these are, I've broken them down here in bullet points too, because I think we need to see them. Just to read them through is beautiful, but reflect a little bit. His own beloved son, he was the most beloved son. He was the master only. Baha'u'llah, when others would refer to any of his other sons as Allah, master, he would correct them and say, there's only one Allah, and that's Abdu'l-Baha. And he didn't say Abdu'l-Baha because he didn't use that title. He used the title of the most great branch. He was the apple of his Baha'u'llah's eye, his vicegerent on earth, the executive of his authority, right at the center of everything, the pivot of his covenant, the shepherd of his flock, the exemplar of his faith. Now think of the master as the image of Baha'u'llah's perfections, the mystery of his revelation, the interpreter of his mind. This gives this terrific scope to Abdu'l-Baha. He understood the mind of the supreme manifestation of God and could interpret it correctly. Anything anyone didn't understand in the revelation should be referred to Abdu'l-Baha according to the verses of the Akdas. He was also the ensign of the most great peace and the focal point of Baha'u'llah's unerring guidance. In a word, the occupant of an office without peer or equal in the entire field of religious history. Nothing similar. He stood guard over it, alert, fearless, and determined to enlarge its limits, blazon abroad its fame, champion its interest, and consummate its purpose. And how well he did it, despite the opposition of the world and the abuse that he took from the enemies of the cause, from the covenant breakers. Now we move on in the text into the explanations of Shoghi Effendi about the station of the master. This would be the second paragraph of the section in your dispensation about Abdu'l-Baha. We'll begin reading there. Oh, I want to say a word about interpreter. You noticed in this previous message that he was able to interpret Baha'u'llah's word and his mind. His mind is his spirit. His mind is not the physical representation of Baha'u'llah. It's his inner reality. And that singular voice that is the author of all the revelations, Abdu'l-Baha is able to interpret. This is why you find Abdu'l-Baha's interpretation of biblical verses, of Quranic verses. He's the interpreter that takes in the whole question of divine revelation from its earliest manifestations on to the very maximum revelation, which is Baha'u'llah himself. So it's interesting that he has this scope of penetrating the meaning of the past scriptures as well as the present day scriptures. Now we're looking at at the quotations. It's on the screen for you. An attempt, I strongly feel, should now be made to clarify our minds regarding the station occupied by Abdu'l-Baha and the significance of his position in this holy dispensation. It would be indeed difficult for us who stand so close to such a tremendous figure and are drawn by the mysterious power of so magnetic a personality to obtain a clear and exact understanding of the role and character of one who, not only in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, but in the entire field of religious history, fulfills a unique function. So we see that he has something mysterious in his nature, which enables him to fulfill the role and character of a position quite unique in the whole history, religious history of mankind. Though, now he goes on to say, though moving in a sphere of his own and holding a rank radically different from that of the author and forerunner of the faith of the Baha'i revelation, he, by virtue of the station ordained for him through the covenant of Baha'u'llah, forms together with them what may be termed the three central figures of a faith that stands unapproached in the world's spiritual history. Amazing. This is where the authority of the three central figures comes from. He towers in conjunction with them above the destinies of this infant faith of God from a level to which no individual or body ministering to its needs after him, and for no less a period than a full 1,000 years can never hope to rise. So I know when we were in Central America, the Guardian had written to some of the pioneers that had gone out and were pioneering in Central American countries. He said that the wings of Abdu'l-Baha were overshadowing them in their services. And Abdu'l-Baha himself in tablets said that wherever the friends are gathered in the spirit of unity and attraction to Baha'u'llah, he's there present. And he proves this by writing to them about meetings that some of the people were in and describes different details of them. He's quite extraordinary. He's at the door of our heart. We can turn to him as well as turn to Baha'u'llah, as long as we understand the relative station between the two of them. Shoghi Effendi says it's possible to pray to Abdu'l-Baha. It's possible indeed to pray to or through the guardian of the faith as well. He towers, he tells us, in conjunction with them above the destinies of the infant faith of God from a level to which no individual or body ministering to its needs. Now, the individual would be the guardian himself or guardians, and the body administering to its needs after him would be the universal house of justice. And so Abdu'l-Baha, the influence of Abdu'l-Baha on the guardianship and on the house of justice is clearly established here. He reigns together with these as one of the central figures. He goes on to say, to degrade his lofty rank by identifying his station with or by regarding it as roughly equivalent to the position of those on whom the mantle of his authority has fallen. Again, that would be the guardian and the house of justice, would be an act of impiety as grave as the no less heretical belief that inclines to exalt him to a state of absolute equality with either the central figure or forerunner of our faith, with either Baha'u'llah or the Bab. And here he begins to establish some equivalence. He says, for wide as is the gulf that separates Abdu'l-Baha from him who is the source of an independent revelation, we're talking about the distance of the master from Baha'u'llah himself, it can never be regarded as commensurate with the greater distance that stands between him who is the center of the covenant, Abdu'l-Baha, and his ministers who are to carry on his work, whatever be their name, their rank, their functions, or their future achievements. So now he's placed the guardian and the successive houses of justice in the category. It's much greater the distance that stands between Abdu'l-Baha and them than stands between Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah himself. You know, at the time that Shoghi Effendi wrote this, there were a number of Baha'is who had met and enjoyed the benefits of Abdu'l-Baha's presence, either during his trips to America or on subsequent pilgrimages, previous pilgrimages before he came, so on. So there were so many people that knew Abdu'l-Baha firsthand, so to speak. And for that, it's because they exalted him so high, because they'd seen him. And this was one of the complaints of Muhammad Ali. Very strange. He said he doesn't claim to be a manifestation, but he shines with the light of the manifestation. He through his love and his services, he demonstrates that he's in that position. Of course, he's the clear mirror of Baha'u'llah. Why wouldn't he do that? How do you defend yourself against such arguments? Let those who have known Abdu'l-Baha, who through their contact with his magnetic personality have come to cherish for him so fervent an admiration, reflect. This is that body of those believers at that time who had met the Master. Reflect in the light of this statement on the greatness of one who is so far above him in station. Uh, think about how great the Master is. Then he could try to imagine now the greatness of Baha'u'llah, above, so far above him. Then he makes a definitive statement that Abdu'l-Baha is not a manifestation of God, that though the successor of his father, he does not occupy a cognate station, that no one else except the Bab and Baha'u'llah can ever claim to lay claim to such a station before the expiration of a full 1,000 years, are verities which lie embedded in the specific utterances of both the founder of our faith and the interpreter of his teachings. A cognate station is a parallel station, is the similar or connected or related stations. So he's telling us that he does not occupy a cognate, a parallel station to that of Baha'u'llah. Only the Bab and Baha'u'llah can claim that in this dispensation. Now Shoghi Effendi goes on, and he goes on to quote, to clarify very clearly. He has to establish this. There's so many believers that who are used to thinking of Abdu'l-Baha as the return of Christ. He had to correct that understanding. So he's pressed to do that. So there's many details here, which those of us who are now following the faith and have read and understood these things and never met Abdu'l-Baha personally, it doesn't represent the same challenge to us. Quoting Baha'u'llah, whoso layeth claim to a revelation direct from God is the express warning uttered in the Kitab-i Aqdas. Ere the expiration of a full 1,000 years, such a man is assuredly a lying impostor. We pray God that he may graciously assist him to retract and repudiate such a claim. Should he repent, God will no doubt forgive him. If, however, he persists in his error, God will assuredly send down one who will deal mercilessly with him. Great indeed is God in punishing. Whosoever, he adds as a further emphasis, interpreteth this verse otherwise than its obvious meaning is deprived of the Spirit of God and of his mercy, which encompasseth all created things. Now, friends who were interpreting the verse, we said full 1,000 years. He said, well, every day in the Baha'i scriptures, every day is equal to 1,000 years or something of the sort, and give us a distorted picture. He says, no, just take it as it states clearly. And finally, should a man appear is yet another conclusive statement, ere the lapse of a full 1,000 years, each year consisting of 12 months according to the Quran, and of 19 months of 19 days each according to the Bayan. And if such a man reveal to your eyes all the signs of God, unhesitatingly reject him. Because you're not getting it straight, is what he's telling us. We won't be able to get it straight. And he's given us this terrific period during which we can get on with the work that he's left through him and through the Master's divine plan to be carried out, to carry the cause forward to its golden age and finally to the kingdom of God on earth and the birth of a world civilization. Way at the end of the dispensation, he says, finally, it will come into being. Now, not knowing the length of the dispensation yet, how long it's going to be, it will depend how much we do and the dispensation and the providence of Baha'u'llah interacting through the power of his revelation, how soon all of this will unfold. He's promised some very dark times before we get to the light. And the dark times are to bring humanity, if you will, to its knees, is to reintroduce the need of divine revelation in ordering human society. And that may take quite a bit of disintegration all around us. Ultimately, he said that humanity needs to be cleansed, and then it needs to be purified, and then it needs to be welded together, all the separate parts. Now, it seems to me that in the course of the stages that we have ahead of us, in which Shoghi Effendi actually has outlined these stages, some 10 stages in all, as I've made it out from the writings. We're going to be severely tested. The Baha'is will be tested. We told him we will face mental tests, but we'll face also calamities. The simple fact that we are not necessarily protected from the consequences of the calamities. We're protected spiritually, inwardly we're protected, but not outwardly. And the best place of safety for us is in service to the cause. If we're engaged in service to the cause, if we're attracting divine confirmations in teaching other individuals and sharing, proclaiming the faith to others, that's the best protection for us, not any place we could live. And what would be the point of fleeing from God anyway? He's introducing these things to transform humanity, to bring humanity to a stage where it can readily recognize the divine origin and the great mercy and benefit of the revelation that Baha'u'llah has brought. We live in a very strange time of negation of God, the negation, even if people believe in God, they say they don't always say that he's doing the right thing, they question, I don't know, if I were God, I wouldn't do that. That's for sure. But we're not God, and we have to take the words of the manifestation and let them transform us so that we can see with his vision, so we can understand what's going on with humanity. And I think he has prophesied some very dark times. Shoghi Effendi said that Abdul Baha used to say that the future of the cause is very bright. The distant future, the cause is very bright. He said that implied in that is that the immediate future is very dark. It has all kinds of problems related to it. So we have to brace ourselves. We have to pray. We want to pray for constancy. We want to pray for steadfastness in our holding to the faith and serving the faith. And we don't want to be disappointed and deluded by the calamities which he has created as a cleansing process for mankind. We don't want to be deluded into saying, well, his promises and his favors have stopped and the situation has gotten so grim that I just don't feel the kind of faith I had before. That would be a terrific lack of constancy. So we have to turn to this for this vision and understanding of the guardians, seeing the stages of the future and be aware of them and be able to understand them. See if I can bring our just a second here. I think where we have to go back here. Hold on a second. Share screen. I think we're back again. Can you see the text now? Okay. Now, after giving us reassurance from Baha'u'llah himself, the Guardian turns to the Master's statements. He said Abdu'l-Baha's own statements in confirmation of this warning about no one claiming a revelation are no less emphatic and binding. This, he declares, my unshakable conviction. This is, he declares, my unshakable conviction, the essence of my unconcealed and explicit belief, a conviction and belief which the denizens of the Abha kingdom fully share. The blessed beauty is the sun of truth, and his light the light of truth. The Bab is likewise the sun of truth, and his light the light of truth. My station is the station of servitude, a servitude which is complete, pure, and real, firmly established, enduring, obvious, explicitly revealed, and subject to no interpretation whatever. I am the interpreter of the word of God, and such is my interpretation. It's interesting in the light of this to think of certain passages of the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, where Baha'u'llah cites something with the past where he says that the essence of servitude is divinity. Obviously, Abdu'l-Baha has removed his own lower self in the middle of this and is reflective of divinity itself. And that's why he's the clear mirror of Baha'u'llah's names and attributes and the source of his guidance and bounty to the Baha'i community. So this is quite clear. Abdu'l-Baha is denying himself any station, certainly not that of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Then Shoghi Effendi quotes from the Master's will. He says, does not Abdu'l-Baha in his own will, in a tone and language that might well confound the most inveterate among the breakers of his father's covenant, rob of their chief weapon those who so long and so persistently had striven to impute to him the charge of having tacitly claimed a station equal, if not superior, to that of Baha'u'llah? Now he quotes from the will of the Master. The foundation of the belief of the people of Baha is this. Thus proclaims one of the weightiest passages of that last document left to voice in perpetuity the directions and wishes of a departed master. His Holiness the Exalted One, the Bab, is the manifestation of the unity and oneness of God and the forerunner of the ancient beauty. His Holiness the Abha Beauty, Baha'u'llah, may my life be a sacrifice for his steadfast friends, is the supreme manifestation of God and the dayspring of his most divine essence. All others are servants unto him and do his bidding, which obviously the first person that refers to is the servant of Baha, Abdu'l-Baha. All others are servants unto him and do his bidding. Shoghi Effendi points out to us that from such clear and formally laid down statements, incompatible as they are with any assertion of a claim to prophethood, we should not by any means infer that Abdu'l-Baha is merely one of the servants of the Blessed Beauty, or at best, one whose function is to be confined to that of an authorized interpreter of his father's teachings. Far be it from me to entertain such a notion or to wish to instill such sentiments. To regard him in such light is a manifest betrayal of the priceless heritage bequeathed by Baha'u'llah to mankind. Let's not just fall and say, well, he's the interpreter, he's the exemplar, and so on. Now, we have a number of quotations that are coming up, which I think we will probably be taking next week at this point. We'll come back to that. If you want to read ahead, you're most welcome. It's this in the section of the World Order letters, the letter called the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, and the section of Abdul Baha, where we're looking at the present time. And we'll take this up next week. Let's have a look at the chat box and see what kind of questions we have here. Greetings, okay. Yeah, what to do with newly declared young people, which come from the activities of the plan, how to help them realize the importance of going deeper into the faith. And friends, I think this is the natural output. Book 1 talks about the need to study the scriptures and original teachings of the cause, though it engages in the system of the first book. It does mention that. So, and certainly the House of Justice has never said we shouldn't be studying these deeper sides of the revelation. They're giving us, confirming a vision of the institute process. They've given us the goal of the essential activities of the cause collectively. And it's to develop an understanding of that the new culture of the faith has been set forth. But that doesn't mean that this is not all based on a very sound understanding of the scriptures of the faith. Particularly, we want to understand the truths as reflected in the Kitab-i-Gan, in some answered questions, and now through our access to the text of the Kitab-i-Aqdas with the Most Holy Book. With all of this meaning that study classes, studying with the young people, quoting from the writings, doing the kind of elaboration which we can do through introductory meetings about the teachings. And I think oftentimes it's through introductory explanations of the cause, based again on the revelation itself, that we attract people to be interested and willing to begin studying the books of the sequence. Volume 1, we have a revised volume 1 now, I think, which is helping with this process. We have people greeting us from around the world here. Do the writings appear to leave the door open that the next manifestation might be a woman? We don't know the answer to that. I frankly don't know the answer to that question. It arises at different times. What we do know is the Guardian has affirmed that all previous manifestations have been men. Mr. Dunbar, is the station of Ali from the Muhammadan revelation and Abdul Baha the same? I think we've had a contradiction of that in the quotations that we've read this morning, where Shoghi Effendi says it's there's no parallel in past dispensations to this, to the role of Abdu'l-Baha. And I've never seen any comparison with the Guardian in that sense either. But I think it's an interesting question, one to reflect on. But the nature of the dispensations, he, you know, the quotes we read about Baha'u'llah at the beginning, it says that the disciples of the Bab were 10,000 times greater than the disciples of Muhammad. 10,000 times greater. There's no scale to really judge this new revelation, this new day of God. And Abdu'l-Baha is right in the center. It is one of the three central figures. So I think it's very hard to compare with the past, although the station of Ali spiritually is a beautiful thing, and his writings and his statements are so uplifting in themselves. Have I outlined the 10 stages Shoghi Effendi stated that we are going through? Yes, I have, and we can maybe come back to that when we finish the present materials that we're studying. No, I was asking for where does it talk about 5 or 10,000 years? 10,000 years one is not published. 5,000, I don't know. In the talks in America, I think there's something, but these are things that I've seen during the course of my services at the World Center. It's a very interesting point. We can ask the research department of the House of Justice, ask the House of Justice to ask the research department so we can see what the actual texts say. What would be an appropriate way to teach people who do not believe in God because of all the bad things happening in the world? All the bad things happening in the world are because you don't believe in God. That's why they're happening. Otherwise, it would need to happen. The materialistic, the leprosy of materialism, Baha'u'llah really calls it that, you know. It's afflicted the people and it's contagious. And they look to each other to see confirmations of why it's true. I mean, everybody knows that this is good and this is better and that's not necessary anymore. And they reject the laws and the general ethics and standards of the past revelation so lightly and confirm themselves in their understanding. The world has drifted away from the authority of its maker. The authority of its maker hasn't gone anywhere, but the people have drifted away from constancy and understanding it. And the religious leaders are the main cause of this because they've denied Baha'u'llah's revelation when it was addressed to them. And so these great leaders have forfeited their positions. Baha'u'llah says we've seized power from two groups of humanity. And that's from the kings and the religious leaders. And now we see that how their powers have waned. The kings, a great number of them, have fallen from their thrones. We were talking about that. You can find the statistics for that available, easily available. And Baha'u'llah talks about it, that power will now pass to the hands of the people. But that's not very satisfactory either. But the people eventually are going to have to recognize the cause, and that will not be so easy because they keep developing new ways of understanding life which contradict the revelation. So we have these people asking, well, why this and why that and so on. We are not insisting with our social teachings, with our teachings regarding that which is acceptable for Baha'is and not acceptable for Baha'is. We don't project that onto the social picture around us. We're not suggesting to other people that they follow our laws on these things. First, essential to anything like that is the recognition of Baha'u'llah as the manifestation of God. After that, he says you have these very strong statements in the Gleanings where Baha'u'llah is quoted by the Guardian, in which he says that he shall not be asked of his doings. Well, once you have accepted his authority, why would you question, well, I like Baha'u'llah's teachings, I accept him as the manifestation of God, but maybe he got this one wrong, like establishing women on the House of Justice and not giving us a full explanation or something of the sort. Okay, here's a very speculative question about I have memory of you stating that Baha'u'llah was the Lord of this planet, which amazed me. Are there other lords of all the planets of our solar system and beyond? You can reach your own conclusions, but wherever there are creatures, they need the guidance of God, and the guidance of God is brought to the creatures through the manifestations of God. And so we have the statements about there's no way to count the number of manifestations that appear in the heavens. It's a very interesting thought. It helps us to realize why we can't stick a concept of God in our heads and have it to be correct. The most we can trust is that Baha'u'llah is the face, is the reflection of the light of God amongst us, and to hold firmly to that, and to turn to Baha'u'llah and through Baha'u'llah in our prayers to an invisible, unknowable God, but not to try to imagine what a God of the universe is. But I think it gives us some idea of why he's so impenetrable and ununderstandable. If he's the Lord of infinite universes, of endless creation, and of all the creatures in the system, and how he's close to all of them through the manifestations of God. But Baha'u'llah, as the Guardian has clearly said, is mainly for this planet. This is very interesting. In which book will we find the 10 stages of the cleansing process of humanity? 10 stages are not all cleansing. 10 stages are in the writings of Shoghi Effendi. If you go and look at the different stages of comedies and of the lesser peace, and then of the spiritualization of mankind, and finally in the birth of the world order of Baha'u'llah, then the beginning of the establishment of the most great peace on the planet, and moving beyond that to finally the birth of a divine civilization. But there's other stages involved in that. Well, that's a rough overview of it. All right, friends, I think we've passed our allotted time this week. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I wish you have a very wonderful week coming up now. We have the twin holy days of the anniversaries of the birth of the Bab and Baha'u'llah before us on the weekend, and that should energize us to carry on and work for the progress of the remaining stages of this 5-year plan ahead of us. And I look forward to be with you to weigh and consider some of the explanations of the Guardian next week once again. Thank you.